How are you doing? Are you well?
Yeah, I'm okay, Rebecca. And you? You all right?
I'm all right.
Good.
I have a 3.5-year-old who's unexpectedly at home from nursery. So
oh, goodness. So well.
One of those, but as you. So, Mr. Drakeford, thank you very, very much for taking the time to do this with us. Much appreciated in your very, very busy schedule. So, Robert Owen, should we jump straight into the question?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, please.
Anything else to start with? So just let you know this will be being recorded, if that's okay with you, but it won't be used until later in May. So first of all, how would you describe Robert Owen, the man, the ideas, the legacy, to someone who doesn't know anything about him at all?
Well, I suppose, summing it up, I'd probably say that he was a man of his time, but also a man beyond his time. So he's not a plaster saint, as, I'm careful not to portray him in that way. His views on black people, on slavery, those sort of things, they wouldn't stand up to examination today. So he's of his time. He's constrained by the way people thought at the time. With that said, he still had the most amazing capacity to transcend his time and to be a pioneer in so many fields. Such an incredible, sort of restless energy, constantly inventing ideas and new ways of doing things. And very importantly, and maybe that's the third thing I would have said, is that he's a relatively rare person who bridges the world of ideas and the world of practical delivery. Because it wasn't just that he had ideas, he then went and tried to make them happen and show how they could make a difference in actual people's actual lives.
And that's actually the hard bit, isn't it? Coming up with the ideas is relatively creative, but actually going out and doing it is the hard part. So
no, we struggle with it here.
Same here. On that note, do you think Robert Owen was a radical? Was he a visionary, or was he just a very, very, very canny businessman?
Well, I think genuinely he was all three, wasn't he? He was certainly radical in the sense that, the orthodoxies of his time in so many ways. He took on the big topics. He organized religion played a part in people's lives when he was alive, to an extent that we find it very hard to imagine today, and to take on, to have a different view from those orthodoxies was not a small thing at all to do, just as, his idea of children and education and the workplace, those are radical and visionary things. But he was a businessman, wasn't he? He was an entrepreneur. He wasn't somebody, as we said, who just wanted to have interesting ideas, but never to do anything with them. So I think he was all three, no doubt at all.
So you have a bit of a background in education yourself. So what are your views on Robert Owen's ideas around education and the importance of learning?
Well, I think they are much closer to the way we think about things today than maybe even as recently as 50 years ago, let alone 250 years ago. So first of all, the importance of education. Our early years education, an infant school, that would have been very, 3.5-year-olds, that would have been in school, didn't he, in New Lanark. Very, very different ideas about discipline. Those were times when physical punishment of children was just thought to be good for them, rather than as we would think it today. So his ideas, as I remember it reading, was that education was about creating character, and that you wanted to do that by emphasizing the moral purpose of education. It was about widening young people's experiences, giving them chances to do things, dancing, music, all of those sort of cultural aspects of the curriculum that would be very unusual indeed. So character development, and the idea that education was there, not the sort of grad education, not to turn out people with a minimum level of education needed to do the bidding of the capitalist machine, but to turn out people who had views, values, possibilities that without education they wouldn't ever have come across. So I think in that sense, it's a very 21st century idea of what education might be about.
It also makes you realise how privileged we are now, doesn't it? Just with access to so many different forms of education. But moving on, what do you think the most important part of his legacy has been? Is it education, or is it something different? And can his legacy still inspire us 250 years later?
You know, I think his legacy does continue to inspire us, and it's hard to choose, isn't it? You know, his legacy in education certainly would be one. His legacy in social partnership, I think that's in Wales we talk a lot about our approach to solving problems is a social partnership approach in which we get all the people with an interest in solving that problem around the table together, and then we do the hard work, which is to hammer out common ground and to find ways in which we can agree on ways forward, even when people start from very different positions. We see an awful lot of that, I think, in the Robert Owen approach to problem solving. But if I had to choose one, from a Welsh perspective, it would be the cooperative ethos. And we're very lucky in Wales, you know, our long tradition, unbroken since the start of universal suffrage, is that people in Wales warm much more to the idea that we all do better when we work together rather than when we compete with one another. And that collaboration, cooperation brings the greatest number of benefits, but particularly delivers the greatest benefits to those who otherwise would struggle to get those things for themselves. So I think in a Welsh context, our wish, for example, we've done very actively just recently, our social care system has gone in 30, 40 years from being a public service monopoly to practically a private sector monopoly. And we want to rebalance that market. We want to have, you know, a different range of providers, and we're very keen indeed to promote and to induce some cooperative businesses into that space. It is a natural way for us to think about it. And that is his legacy.
How is his legacy built into policy? This is going slightly off script because you've already answered the next question. I'm really interested in your views on that, on how Robert Owen's legacy is built into Welsh policy.
Oh, well, in Welsh policy making, I think you would absolutely see it. So, you know, I'll give you an obvious example, I think. A recent example, the TTP system, the track, trace, protect system. In Wales, we took a conscious decision in the beginning. Ours would be a public service run by people who live in local areas. So we brought teams of people together from different backgrounds. Some of them worked in local government, some in the health service, some in other aspects of public service. And when the phone goes, if you're at home in Wales and the phone goes to tell you that you need to self-isolate, you are talking to somebody whose voice you recognise, who lives in the same part of the world that you live in, and you know that their only motivation is a public service motivation. It's to try and get you to make your contribution to the greater good. Nobody is making a profit. Nobody is doing it in order to extract sort of surplus value from human misery. It costs a fraction of what the English system costs, and we don't pay any nothing leaks out of it either. Now, I think that's a natural way for us to do things. And I think I could repeat that example many, many times over. And I think it does demonstrate the strength of that cooperative, collective sense that we still have.
It's very much talking with, not speaking at, isn't it? Or speaking with, not talking at.
Oh yeah, no.
Part of the conversation.
Absolutely.
No.
Yeah. No, the citizen is at the center. Is everything we achieve because we persuade people to come with us on the journey, rather than because we're trying to herd them down a path against their will.
You have already touched on this already, but is there anything else you'd like to say about Robert Owen's legacy in Wales, given that he was born in Newtown?
Well, of course, there, as you say, there is that very specific Newtown aspect to it. The Robert Owen Museum in Newtown. I will be speaking next week to a group of young people from the Robert Owen High School in Newtown about the anniversary and so on. So there's a part of Wales where it is very visible and very important. And, Wales Co-op Centre that we've had here for 30 years and which links us internationally as well. I suppose that's another aspect of Robert Owen, isn't it? Is that travel isn't easy these days. But when you think how difficult travel was when he was alive, and yet how far he went, he was everywhere, wasn't he? So, we want Wales to be an outward-facing, international place where we welcome people from around the globe and think of ourselves as making contributions to things. And our cooperative centre here was inspired by Mondragon in the Basque Country. And we have, Wales has enormous links with the Basque Country for all sorts of reasons, linguistic, cultural, all of those things. So that's another part of how his legacy, I think, resonates with us in Wales.
It was interesting that you said that Robert Owen and his ideas and legacy are very visible in parts of Wales, because I guess my next question is, why aren't his ideas, Robert Owen's ideas, the ideas of cooperation, more widely known or more widely implemented? And what can we do about that? How can we promote them? How can we teach about those ideas today?
Well, the anniversary is an important opportunity for us to do that, isn't it? And to draw that back into people's memory and to make more. I think in a Welsh sense, we would like to make more of his connections with Newtown and the things we still do that are so closely aligned with the ways his own contribution to thought and to practice. So I think the other way is just reminding people that some of the things that he would have campaigned around or had ideas around were by no means past them today either. So it's not historical interest only. I mean, there is historic interest, of course, but there is contemporary interest. The gig economy, modern slavery, 0 hours contracts, substandard housing. There's a lot that you could go to Robert Owen and find him writing about and campaigning about that are absolutely relevant to us still today. So it's about the contemporary relevance, I think, as well as the historical legacy.
So if you had to choose one or two things that you think a young Robert Owen would be campaigning for or against today, what do you think they would be?
Oh dear. Well, I think workers' rights. I think the fair work agenda, as we would call it here, I don't think there's any doubt there will be lots and lots of resonances still there for him about the way in which some parts of the economy are still exploitative in the way that he would have recognised and campaigned against. So that would definitely be one. I wonder if you think of the experience of the last 12 months, whether the experience of children during the pandemic will be something that he would be, likely to be particularly concerned about. We worry about it a lot here, about the way that, even if you're getting on a bit like me, it's still an extraordinary year, but it's an extraordinary year amongst many other years. Whereas if you're a 7-year-old, this is this is well over 10% of your life has been lived in the way we've had to lead it in the last 12 months. So yeah, I suppose I wonder if there was something very particular to today in the experience we've just been through, whether everything that he had to say and the very direct interest he took in the way the children were brought up and the experiences that they had, whether that is something else he would be talking about and pointing us to and asking questions about.
I would hope so. I'm sure he would. One of my favourite stories of Robert Owen is the way that he made sure that his workers had 8 hours work, 8 hours recreation and 8 hours rest. I think that's marvellous, especially in a week when you have the London Finance Company, all the workers there campaigning to reduce the weekly hourly work from 95 to 80-hour weeks, capping it. It's mad.
Yeah.
Absolutely mad, isn't it?
Well, yes, it's really fascinating, isn't it, to think of what were the things of the last 12 months that would really strike somebody coming up to that tradition. And working from home has got lots of pluses to it. And I do think that. But it does blur the boundary between home and work, doesn't it? It's much harder to police that boundary. When I've talked to a lot of groups of young people, slightly older, not children, but so 14, 15-year-olds, and that's a point they make all the time, is that they find it very hard to know where to draw the line between schoolwork and not working from school, because you're at home all the time. And there are no sort of, there are no lines in the day that says, now you're in school, now you're at home. And the result is that work and school bleed into time that otherwise you would have used for other things. It
does, absolutely. And it is heartbreaking. You're very, very right to bring up children. It is heartbreaking. And kids have missed so much school, and then they're expected to go straight back and then think about exams, think about a future. And as you say, 10, 20% of their life has been in lockdown.
Yeah. No, I think it's tremendously hard. But I'm just talking this morning to somebody whose child is going back into school next week. I'm very confident and very, a child, very able child as well, but nervous about going back in a way that they never would normally be because of the number of weeks that have elapsed since they were last there. Somehow the challenge seems much bigger in their mind, and hopefully they'll be back and it'll all be just like you've never been away. But no, I think the focus on children would be something you could easily imagine.
You really can, very much so. Mark Drakeford, thank you very much. That's the end of my questions. Is there anything else you'd like to talk about in terms of Robert Owen or Wales or cooperation?
Oh, wow, Wales and cooperation. We have in our Labour group here in the Senate a very large number of cooperative party Senate members, and a very lively group of people. So they will produce their own, separate to the Labour Party, manifesto for the election. And we will draw heavily on it, not just in the field of social care, as I was mentioning, but more broadly. Lots of very interesting stuff, I think, going on in the energy field now in cooperation, community ownership of renewable energy assets. And Wales we're very lucky indeed. We have fantastic natural assets in the renewable energy field. We've got wind, we're surrounded by waves on 3 sides, and it even rains occasionally. here. So we've
Almost as
got,
much as
we've
Manchester.
got the things that we can.
Almost as much as Manchester. Yeah.
We can, yeah, but community ownership and cooperative ownership in the renewable energy field, I think, is a strongly emerging strand in as a cooperative thinking. Yeah, so yeah, no, loads and loads.
There is, no, it's marvellous. So I'll show you if you know. So I'm from Cooperative News. So it's a magazine about and for cooperatives around the world. So we cover Wales a lot. We cover energy cooperatives a lot. And there's so much interesting things happening. People are creating solutions for problems in their communities and doing something about it. So it's going back to what we were talking about earlier in terms of it's good to come up with the ideas, but then how do you implement them? And actually the cooperative model is a brilliant way to do that. It's just a shame not more people know about it. So that's one thing we're working on quite hard at the moment, which is good. Anyway, Mark Drakeford, thank you very much.
Good. No, pleasure. Thank you very much indeed.
No problem. You take care.
Now.
Bye-bye now. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye. Bye.